Under the pale silver glow of Kevar's twin moons, Lieutenant Aaron Reeves stepped off the shuttle and into the vast glass atrium of the alien embassy, his boots clicking softly against the smooth floor as he tried not to gape at the sheer strangeness around him. Towering sculptures of crystal shimmered faintly with their own light, and alien figures moved with a grace that seemed more like flowing water than walking, their eyes glinting in hues no human iris could match. And though Reeves had trained for months to meet the Va'ruun delegation, nothing in his preparation compared to the reality before him. He was here to finalize a trade agreement between Earth and the Va'ruun, a delicate exchange of technology for rare minerals. Yet as he followed a quiet, robed attendant deeper into the hall, he felt a faint tug of unease, as if something in the air itself whispered caution. The room they led him to was smaller, warmer, its walls covered in living vines that shimmered faintly with bioluminescence, and there, standing in the center, was a tall figure with skin like polished silver and long hair that fell in waves of pale blue, her eyes the exact shade of ocean water glimpsed through sunlight. She wore no crown or insignia, yet she radiated authority in the way her posture seemed perfectly balanced between welcome and watchfulness. And when she finally turned to face him, Reeves had the sudden, irrational thought that she could see straight through him. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching into something electric. And then she stepped closer, the faint sound of something like a cat's purr filling the air, and her lips curved in the smallest of smiles before she said, in flawless but oddly melodic English, "AGRRR." The word rolled off her tongue like it was alive, low and resonant, making the hairs on Reeves's arms stand up, and he blinked, unsure if his translator implant had glitched, because what she'd said wasn't in any Earth language he knew. What? He asked, trying to keep his tone polite despite the confusion, but instead of explaining, she tilted her head and looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, part amusement, part pity, and for a heartbeat longer she simply studied him, her eyes narrowing slightly as if testing some silent theory. And though Reeves wanted to press her for an answer, something in her gaze warned him to hold his tongue, as though the wrong question might carry a weight he wasn't ready for. And somewhere in the embassy, faint and almost inaudible, a low hum began to vibrate through the floor, so subtle that he might have imagined it, yet enough to make his pulse quicken as he wondered if their meeting had just shifted from diplomacy into something far stranger. Reeves stood frozen for a moment after the strange silver-skinned woman spoke, his mind caught between trying to process the sound of her voice and the odd weight the words seemed to carry, and when he finally managed to repeat it back, "Agur," his awkward attempt drew a light laugh from her, not mocking, but warm and strangely knowing, as though she were hearing a child try to pronounce a difficult word for the first time. The sound was beautiful, like bells muffled by velvet, but it only deepened his confusion, and he glanced toward the robed attendant for help. Yet the attendant's eyes flickered briefly to the woman before looking away, lips pressed shut as if he dared not speak. So Reeves tried again, slower this time, but the alien woman shook her head gently, her long blue hair sliding over her shoulders in a way that caught the soft light from the vines along the walls, and she leaned just a little closer, repeating the word herself in a low, purring tone that seemed to hum against his chest, "Gur," and this time it was almost hypnotic, as though the sound carried an echo he couldn't quite hear. He half expected his translator implant to resolve the meaning, but instead, the device in his ear chirped once and then went silent, leaving him no closer to understanding. And the woman's eyes glimmered with what might have been amusement or something far more complex. Reeves tried to fill the silence by mentioning the purpose of his visit, the trade agreement, the rare minerals, the promised cooperation between their peoples, but she waved a slender hand lightly, almost dismissing the subject, as though it were less important than something else entirely, and the motion made him pause, because nothing in the diplomatic briefing had suggested the Va'ruun would ever sidestep such negotiations. "Do you not understand?" she asked at last, her voice soft but carrying a strange urgency, and Reeves could only shake his head slowly, feeling that admitting his ignorance might be a mistake, but also knowing it was unavoidable. Her smile faded then, replaced by a look of cool seriousness, and she leaned even closer, so close he could see faint patterns under her silver skin that shimmered and shifted like reflections on water, and she whispered, "If you do not understand, you may already be in danger." The words sent a sudden chill down his spine, and he almost laughed to break the tension, but the look in her eyes stopped him cold, for it was not the look of someone speaking in metaphor or warning about some distant political problem. It was the look of someone who had just told him the first hint of a truth that could change everything. And before he could ask her what she meant, the low hum he had noticed earlier grew a little louder, just enough to make the vines on the walls tremble faintly as if responding to an unseen vibration. And he realized with an uneasy certainty that whatever a gur meant, it was not a word for greeting or trade. It was a word meant to prepare him for something he was not ready to face. Asterisk Reeves stared at the alien woman, his mind racing to find sense in her warning. But the more he tried to fit it into the safe framework of a diplomatic meeting, the more it resisted explanation, and the growing hum under his feet made it even harder to think. The translator in his ear buzzed once, then fed him a confusing string of possible meanings for the phrase agur, ranging from the growl to shadow beast to unwelcome presence, none of which gave him comfort. And when he looked back at her, she was watching him as though weighing how much more to reveal. Finally she said, "My people once used that word in our oldest tongue. It can be a greeting, yes, but also a sign that something dangerous moves unseen." And her eyes flickered toward the dark corners of the vine-covered chamber as if she expected to see movement there, making Reeves glance over his shoulder despite himself. The vines swayed gently as though stirred by air currents, but there was no breeze, and the silence of the room seemed to press in heavier than before, thick enough to make him notice every beat of his own heart. "If you are wise, you will listen to me," she continued, her tone low but firm, "because it is possible the danger is already here, and it is not of my people." And the way she said "not of my people" made Reeves feel as though they were no longer speaking about politics or trade, but something far older, far more personal. His training told him to request clarification, to follow standard diplomatic protocol. Yet something deeper, more instinctive, told him to trust her, even though they had met only moments ago. "What kind of danger?" he asked carefully, keeping his voice calm, but she only shook her head, her gaze sweeping the room as if answering might draw unwanted attention. "To explain would be to call it," she said, "and I will not summon it with careless words," which only made Reeves' curiosity burn hotter, but also made a small knot of unease tighten in his stomach. Then, with no warning, the embassy. Lights dimmed, shadows lengthened across the walls, and the hum from below deepened into something that felt almost like a heartbeat, slow and heavy, as if the building itself were alive and aware of them. She stepped closer, close enough that he caught the faint scent of something like cold rain on stone, and said quietly, "Stay near me, and if I say the word again, do not ask questions, just move." And her eyes, bright as liquid sapphire, locked onto his as though trying to burn the instruction into his memory. Reeves opened his mouth to reply, but stopped when he saw her gaze shift past him toward the far end of the room, narrowing slightly as though she had just spotted something in the gloom. And for the first time since he arrived, he saw her purr, stop abruptly, replaced by a stillness so sharp it made the fine hairs on his arms stand on end. And in that silence, somewhere just beyond sight, he thought he heard the faint scrape of metal against stone. Reeves turned his head slowly toward the far corner, his every instinct urging caution, and from the shadows a tall figure emerged, its form wrapped in dark, segmented armor that caught the dim light in dull flashes, the design unlike anything Reeves had seen in Verun or human records, its surface etched with strange symbols that seemed to shift when looked at too long. The figure moved with a measured precision, each step soundless despite the weight of its armor, and as it came closer, Reeves could feel the air around it grow colder, as if it carried a piece of deep space inside its shell. His hand instinctively went to the sidearm at his belt, but before he could draw it, the alien woman, Lyraya, placed her hand firmly on his arm, shaking her head once in a silent but urgent signal to stay still, her eyes never leaving the intruder. The armored figure paused a few meters away, its visor a smooth black surface that reflected nothing, and though Reeves could not see a mouth, he felt the strange sensation of being studied, weighed, and found. Interesting, Lyria's voice was calm but low when she said, "This is why I warned you. This is the predator I spoke of, but it does not hunt flesh. It hunts secrets," and her words sank into Reeves' mind with a heaviness that made him suddenly very aware of everything he carried. From his datapad to the encrypted diplomatic orders in his pocket, the intruder tilted its head slightly, and then it spoke in a language Reeves did not recognize. A harsh, resonant string of sounds that made his translator buzz violently before failing entirely. But somehow Reeves still understood the meaning. It had spoken his name. The way it said it was wrong, stretched, almost reverent, as though it had been waiting to meet him for a very long time. The silence that followed pressed down on him like a physical weight, and for the first time since arriving, Reeves felt a flash of fear that had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with survival. Lyria stepped slightly in front of him, her silver skin shimmering faintly in the low light, and she replied to the intruder in her native tongue, her voice firm and sharp now, the musical lilt replaced with a tone like the edge of a blade. The intruder stood still for a moment, then began to advance again, each step deliberate and unhurried, as though it knew there was nowhere for them to run. And Reeves noticed that the vines on the walls had stopped their gentle movement entirely, as if even the living plants in the room were holding their breath. His instinct screamed at him to move, to act, but Lyria's hand stayed steady on his arm, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so slender. And when she finally spoke again, it was not to him but to the intruder, her words faster now, urgent, almost pleading. The figure gave no visible reaction, only stopped a short distance away and lowered its head slightly, as though acknowledging her but refusing to retreat. And in that moment Reeves realized that whatever this thing was, it was not here by accident. It had come for him specifically. And Lyria's warning had only been the first small crack in the door to something much larger and far more dangerous than he had imagined. The moment the armored intruder shifted its stance, Reeves felt a jolt of adrenaline, his instinct screaming that the thing was about to strike, and in the same heartbeat Lyria's grip on his arm turned into a hard pull. As she yanked him sideways, her voice sharp and urgent as she shouted for him to move. The first step was chaos, the air behind them slicing with a faint hiss as something he didn't want to know what passed, where his head had been only a moment earlier, and they were running, boots pounding against the smooth floor as they burst through an arched doorway, into a long corridor lit only by the faint glow of the vine-like structures that clung to the walls. Their shadows leapt and twisted as they sprinted, and behind them Reeves could hear the measured, unhurried steps of the intruder, the sound not like running, but like something certain of its prey, following without fear of losing it. Lyria led the way with impossible grace, her long strides smooth and fast, and Reeves tried to match her pace even as his mind reeled, demanding answers. But she seemed focused entirely on the path ahead, turning sharply down narrow side halls, through chambers filled with strange sculptures, and along walkways suspended over vast open spaces where soft alien light shimmered far below. "It's not after you," she said breathlessly as they ran, her voice carrying both urgency and something like regret. "It's after what you carry." And Reeves almost stumbled, confused, because he hadn't brought anything except his datapad and standard diplomatic gear. But this was not the time to question her. He could feel the air grow colder again, that strange presence pressing closer with every turn. The corridors around them began to change, the vines fading and giving way to smooth, dark metal that seemed older than the embassy itself, the air smelling faintly of ozone and dust. And Reeves realized she was leading him into parts of the structure that might not be on any official map. Still, the sound of pursuit never wavered, each step behind them steady, patient, like a predator pacing itself until the moment it decided to close in. They rounded another corner, and Lyria suddenly skidded to a stop, her eyes fixed on the wide docking bay ahead, the bright lights spilling across the floor in a sharp contrast to the dim corridors. And for an instant Reeves felt relief until he saw the dark, armored silhouette standing between them and the waiting ships, the black visor turning toward them with a slow, deliberate motion. His stomach dropped as he realized the truth. It hadn't been following them from behind. It had been waiting here all along, herding them toward this place, and now, with the only exit blocked, the predator had exactly what it wanted. The docking bay felt impossibly still, the vast open space amplifying the tension until even the faint hum of machinery seemed too loud, and Reeves could feel his pulse pounding in his ears as the armored figure took a slow step forward, its visor reflecting the bright bay lights without revealing the faintest hint of a face beneath. Lyria moved in front of him, her posture tall and steady, and began speaking rapidly in her own language, her voice sharp and measured like the strikes of a blade. And though Reeves could not understand the words, he sensed the weight behind them, the way they carried both warning and command. The intruder stopped, head tilting slightly as if considering her words, and for a long, breathless moment no one moved, the air itself seeming to hang in suspension. Then with an almost reluctant motion, the figure lowered the weapon it carried, the faint blue glow along its edges dimming as it straightened and spoke again in that strange, resonant voice that made Reeves's translator hiss with static, though he still somehow caught the faint sense of resignation in the tone. Lyria turned to face him then, her expression softer now but no less serious, and she said in clear, calm English, "It was never here to kill you, it was here to find what you carry." And before he could protest that he carried nothing of value, she nodded toward the inside pocket of his uniform jacket, frowning. Reeves reached in, and to his shock pulled out a small crystalline shard no bigger than his thumb, its surface pulsing faintly with inner light, and he felt a strange warmth radiating from it, as though it recognized being held. "That," Lyria said quietly, "is the key to ending a war that began before your species learned to walk upright. A war my people have hidden from you, because we feared what humans might do with the truth." And Reeves stared at the crystal, his mind trying to fit this revelation into any frame of logic and failing. Because he had never seen it before, he had no idea how it got into his pocket. "It sought you because the crystal chose you," she continued, her eyes holding his, with a kind of fierce certainty. "And now that you hold it, the choice cannot be undone." The intruder gave a low, rumbling sound that might have been agreement or warning, and then, without another word, it turned and strode toward the far side of the bay, vanishing through a hatch that sealed shut behind it with a heavy clang, leaving only the echo of its presence in the cold air. Reeves looked back at Lyria, wanting to ask what came next, but before he could speak, she stepped closer and placed her hand gently over the crystal, her touch sending a faint vibration through it, and she smiled, not the warm, amused smile from their first meeting, but something deeper, almost sad. Then she leaned close enough for him to hear the faintest whisper, a purr like distant thunder, and said once more, a grr, the sound curling through the air like a promise and a warning all at once. And Reeves knew with a certainty he could not explain that his life, and perhaps the fate of two civilizations, had just shifted into something from which there was no turning back.